In the autumn of 1878, a farmer working a dry creek bed in western Arkansas struck something unusual with his plow. At first, he thought it was a buried tree root. Instead, he uncovered an old military rifle. The weapon had clearly survived a fire. Its wooden stock was blackened, the barrel twisted by intense heat, and it was wrapped inside a decaying cotton sack. But it wasn't the rifle that shocked people. It was what was sewn inside the sack. 11 names. Every name carefully stitched into the fabric with faded reddish thread. 9 of those names belonged to wanted fugitives who had either been captured or mysteriously disappeared years earlier. The remaining 2 names seemed to belong to people who had vanished completely from official history. The farmer carried the strange discovery into town and handed it over to federal authorities. Then something even stranger happened. Within 48 hours, the rifle disappeared. The sack disappeared. The farmer's written statement disappeared. And one particular name sewn into the cloth vanished from every record connected to the case. For decades, almost nobody talked about it. When fragments of the truth finally emerged years later, historians uncovered a story so disturbing that parts of it were quietly sealed away. At the center of that mystery stood a woman known only by a single name, Nanny. And according to frontier legends, she was the only bounty hunter on the American frontier whose reputation could make armed outlaws abandon their weapons and flee across the border. To understand why, we have to travel back to the years after the Civil War. At that time, the land that would eventually become Oklahoma was known as the Indian Territory. It was a dangerous place. Thousands of fugitives, murderers, horse thieves, and former guerrilla fighters hid there because law enforcement had little power to reach them. The territory became one of the largest safe havens for criminals in North America. Federal marshals operating from Fort Smith, Arkansas, tried to bring order to the chaos. But they couldn't do it alone. They relied on deputy marshals and bounty hunters willing to risk their lives tracking dangerous men across thousands of miles of wilderness. Most of those hunters were hardened veterans. Almost all of them were men, and most of them didn't survive very long. But Nanny was different. Long before she became feared across the frontier, she was born into slavery in Mississippi around 1840. Her original name was Hester. She spent her childhood on a cotton plantation where life was defined by hard labor, violence, and constant fear. The plantation was controlled by a brutal overseer named Abner Gossett. Former slaves who survived those years later described him as a man who seemed to enjoy cruelty. He kept trained dogs to hunt runaways. He carried a whip he used without mercy. And among everyone forced to live on the plantation, Hester suffered more than most. Then came the year 1864. The Civil War was still raging. One night, after her younger brother was severely beaten and locked away, Hester made a decision that would change everything. She waited until darkness covered the plantation. Then she quietly walked to the overseer's house. What happened next was never fully recorded. Even witnesses decades later struggled to describe it. But one thing is certain. By morning, Abner Gossett had been left for dead. Hester freed her injured brother, took Gossett's horse and weapons, and disappeared into the night. She never looked back. After reaching Union lines, she gained her freedom and began working with soldiers moving through the South. It quickly became clear that she possessed a rare talent. She could track people. Not ordinary tracking, extraordinary tracking. Military officers wrote that she could read signs in the wilderness better than experienced scouts. She could follow trails others couldn't even see. She could find deserters, fugitives, and criminals with astonishing accuracy. After the war ended, most people tried to rebuild their lives. Hester chose a different path. She learned that Abner Gossett had survived. Worse still, he had joined a gang operating in the lawless regions of the Indian Territory. So she followed. Over the next several years, stories about a mysterious female tracker began spreading across the frontier. People called her Nanny. She hunted fugitives alone. No partners, no backup, no posse, just a rifle, a revolver, and an unmatched ability to track her prey. Court records reveal that she captured or killed dozens of wanted criminals. The rewards she collected made her one of the most successful bounty hunters of her era. But there was something unusual about her work. Most fugitives she captured were brought in alive whenever possible. Yet there were 7 specific men she treated differently. These 7 never reached a courtroom. When one of them disappeared, only a strange clue remained behind. A single carved bone bead. No body, no explanation, just the bead. Rumors spread quickly. People whispered that Nanny wore 7 bone beads around her neck. One for each man she was hunting. And every time another target vanished, one more bead disappeared from the cord. Outlaws became terrified. Some fled the territory. Others buried their weapons and ran. Because they believed that once Nanny started following your trail, there was no escape. One by one, the 7 names were crossed off her list, until only 2 remained. The first was Abner Gossett, the man responsible for years of suffering on the plantation where she had grown up. The second was someone even more mysterious, a man whose identity seemed protected by powerful people in Washington. Records vanished. Documents were altered. Officials refused to investigate. It was as if someone wanted his secrets buried forever. Then, in 1873, Nanny disappeared. For 4 months, nobody saw her. No sightings. No bounty payments. No rumors. Nothing. When she finally resurfaced, Abner Gossett was found alive but captured. Pinned to his clothing was a handwritten message. 3 chilling words. Not him alone. The message suggested something larger. Something darker. Gossett was eventually convicted and sentenced to death. Before his execution, he made a shocking statement. He claimed the man Nanny was still hunting was worse than he had ever been. And he warned that powerful people would never allow that man's crimes to become public. Those words proved to be true, because Nanny's final target wasn't simply a criminal. He was a former government official. A man accused of using his position to capture escaped slaves and secretly sell them for profit. Research later suggested that Hester's own mother had been one of his victims. For years, Hester believed her mother had spent her entire life on the plantation. Then she learned the truth. Her mother had once escaped slavery. She had been free, but she was captured again and sold back into bondage through a corrupt network run by powerful men. Everything suddenly made sense. The years of suffering, the broken families, the stolen lives. And so Hester wrote out one final time. When she finally found the man responsible, the records become strangely incomplete. Names disappear. Pages are missing. Witnesses refuse to speak. But one thing is clear. After that encounter, Hester's hunt was over. She never collected another bounty. She never chased another fugitive. Instead, she bought a small piece of land in Arkansas and quietly disappeared from history. No confirmed grave has ever been found. No death record exists, only stories, and the mystery of the rifle buried in that creek bed. The rifle wrapped in a sack containing 11 names. Perhaps they were the names of the people she hunted. Or perhaps one of those names belonged to Hester herself. Because after spending years tracking monsters, she may have realized that the final person she was searching for was the woman she had become along the way. And that's why, nearly 150 years later, the legend of Nanny remains one of the most haunting stories ever to emerge from the American frontier.